So this is the painting we are going to be looking at this evening. This is a painting called Music in the Tuileries Gardens, painted by Edouard Manet in 1862. As we can see here, it's roughly, it's just over a meter wide. It's 118 centimeters wide by 76 centimeters high. And we have two rather lovely art handlers there holding the painting up as it's sort of being hung on the wall in an unknown location. What can we see? So in the painting, we can see lots and lots of people sitting beneath a canopy of trees with a tiny glimmer of sky in the middle of the top of the canvas there. And people of all ages and genders. We have women seated in fabulous dresses, men in top hats, children playing, objects such as an umbrella, a couple of chairs in the right-hand corner there, and a lovely kind of smattering of light breaking through the trees as we sort of look over the tops of the heads of this large crowd gathered outside. So where are we? So we've looked at what we're looking at, but we are somewhere specific. This is the Tuileries Gardens in Paris. Now, these are the gardens, or that's the park that stretches out in front of the Louvre Museum. For those of you who know Paris, it's the sort of a patch of green between the Louvre and the Place de la Concorde. And these were once the gardens to the Royal Palace, in which the Louvre Museum sits. And sort of from the 19th century, they became a kind of a park, a parkland sort of area where the public could sort of enjoy, relax and wonder and listen to music. Now, the title rather implies that's what's happening here in this painting, although I can't see any musicians. I'm not sure about anyone else, but there don't seem to be any musicians in the painting. So although the title implies that's what is happening, we don't have any sense that we are listening to a concert yet. There are these rather wonderful wrought iron chairs, empty chairs in the foreground that look like they need to be shuffled into some sort of order and for people to sit down on them. Or perhaps they're the chairs of the musicians, or are the musicians where we are, and the crowd is sort of waiting for the concert to start. That said, I do find the title just wonderful because although there is no implication of music, I really feel looking at this painting that you get a real sense of kind of chatter and noise, not only sort of because all of these figures are visual chatter, there's sort of all these figures are abutting one another, but also just in terms of them all engaging and interacting with one another. And we have a number of quite key figures in this painting. You'll notice as you kind of scan your eye across the painting that some of the figures are sort of in higher definition or clearer to sort of to identify, or perhaps more particular than others, which are perhaps a little more blurry or which sort of fade into the background. Particularly these two rather wonderful women right at the front here. I think I should start by saying that Manet is incredibly revolutionary. He is sort of bridging this very important moment between a kind of academic style of painting and a sort of more real and impressionist style. And we very much see that here, not only in subject matter, but also in technique. So subject matter, here we are simply witnessing a day in modern Paris. We see these figures gathered for a music concert that happened twice a week in this park, and this is a very kind of mundane occurrence. This isn't anything particularly out of the ordinary. Now, in the past, heroic painting was academic painting, it was history painting, it was religious painting, and this was very revered. But the idea of painting a kind of everyday scene, of course, now to us feels very normal and very ordinary. But at this moment in the mid-19th century, it was very, very unusual. And the technique is the second reason that Manet was so kind of revolutionary, is that it's not particularly, the technique is not particularly meticulous. It's very kind of loose. His brushwork is very loose. We'll go closer in a moment, but just to give you a sort of impression, a sense of how he's applying the paint. If we look closely at these two ladies here, you really get this very, very free style of painting. Now, this is very different to this very kind of precise and crisp style of painting that had come previously. So he is really kind of quite revolutionary, as I say, both in terms of subject matter and technique. Now, he was surrounded in Paris by a number of very important figures who kind of contribute to this this change in style, or this kind of surge in a sort of new style of painting. Which we'll look at a little closer when we get into the painting. But just to give you a sort of background on Manet himself, he was actually very kind of used to scenes like this, these quite affluent members of society gathering for very sophisticated events such as a concert. He in fact came from a very wealthy family. His father was very high up in the Ministry of Justice. He was a very revered judge, and his mother was a sort of aristocrat with links to the royal family in Sweden. So they had a very wealthy, affluent family life. And his father had wanted him to become a lawyer, as was quite common in those days for sort of ambitious parents from wealth. But Manet very much wanted to be an artist, and he was at school. He went to boarding school in the 1840s for four years, and during this time his father tried to enroll him into the Navy, which he failed to do. He even sent him to Rio de Janeiro as a kind of apprentice on a ship, thinking that this would sort of give him a bit of training. And when Manet came back to France, he tried again to get into the Navy and failed for a second time. And it was at this point that his father gave in, and Manet was able to kind of pursue this dream of becoming a painter. And he was supported by his uncle. And it was in 1850 that he joins the studio of an artist called Thomas Couture, who was a sort of French academic painter. And under Thomas Couture, he sort of learns to paint in a very kind of classical, he has very classical training. That said, in 1856, he sets up his own studio with another artist, and he really kind of comes under the influence in the 1850s of an artist called Gustave Courbet, who was very much a realist painter, painting what he saw, not what was kind of perfect and idealized. And it was also in this year, in 1856, that Manet made some short trips around the continent. So he went to the Netherlands, to Italy, and to Germany. And it was here that he, of course, saw paintings by old masters such as Titian and Rembrandt and Caravaggio, and significantly the Spanish artist Diego Velázquez. And also Frans Hals, the Dutch artist Frans Hals. And these are very important painters to Manet, which we'll come to in a short while. But it was in the early 1860s that things really kind of changed. He'd been painting quite a lot of history painting and religious painting. But in the early 1860s, he kind of gains some respect. He exhibits a work of a Spanish musician in the early 1860s. And it's exhibited at the Salon, which was really kind of the Royal Academy of, well, it's the most revered academy really in the continent. It came before the Royal Academy as we know it in London. And having your work exhibited there and accepted there and seen by collectors and dealers was really kind of your way of making a way in the world. And he exhibited at the Salon. He gained some respect and a reputation in 1861. And in 1862, he paints this painting. Now, this was exhibited alongside 13 other works in a solo show, another exhibition by a sort of private gallerist in 1863. And it really kind of came at a very controversial moment for Manet. 1863, when he exhibits this painting, he also exhibits, or he submits a painting called Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe, which is the lunch on the grass, which is one of his most famous paintings. It's in the Musée d'Orsay. I'm sure many of you have seen it. And this was a hugely controversial painting, not only in terms of its style, as was this, controversial for its very loose and impressionistic style. But the Déjeuner sur l'herbe was very controversial because it included a nude woman seated having a kind of picnic with two clothed men. And it drew very much on the old masters. But it was very criticized for being kind of completely inappropriate. This nude lady, who was in fact a prostitute in Paris, who'd been used as the model, who then goes on to model for his famous painting of the nude female Olympia. And so this was a moment that the world kind of became very divided about Manet. The critics were kind of criticizing him for being too outlandish. But the impressionists, the young impressionists, and the sort of the artists, and he had this sort of group of supporters, were very enthused by him and by this kind of approach to modernity, and this very sort of innovative approach to painting. So I'm just going to zoom in on the painting so I can pick out a few of the important figures. Now, first and foremost, on the far, far left of the painting, we have the man himself. This is a self-portrait of Manet, holding what looks like a cane, if we compare it to the man in front of him, but could also be a paintbrush. The idea of the artist self-portrait holding a palette or a paintbrush was something that goes back to sort of the 16th century. He's looking out at us. He's very much cropped by the edge of the canvas. Now, this is something I haven't seen talked about in any of the literature when I've been reading about this painting, but I'm sure it's relevant. If we look at the painting, this is a panoramic painting. This is very similar to what you'd find in a photograph. You have a very kind of truncated edge to the canvas, where we see Manet very much being kind of cut off on his left-hand side. And there's no real focus. It's a kind of sea of heads. There's no central point. Now, this is this is the middle of the 19th century. Of course, at the beginning of the 19th century, photography was becoming a medium in its own right, and it was causing huge excitement among artistic communities. So I think there's no coincidence that this has somewhat of a photographic feel to it. This painting, enhanced by these trees which punctuate the crowd and give a real sense of depth to the scene. Now, Baudelaire was the man who said that finding the eternal in the transitory was what artists really were there to do. So this idea of finding the kind of this long-lasting life in these kind of transitory moments, and that was what made a successful painting, not the fact that we should sort of dwell on the past and history painting and religious scenes, but really kind of capture these very vibrant moments of modern sort of industrious life, and capture them very quickly. And we can see that in paint very much here. Manet's painting very quickly, very sketchily. We just see sort of these lovely passages here and here, where you really can't make out much sort of figuration, but you get a real sense of kind of movement and motion and life. And that's something that Manet is very much known for. And in this painting, he goes so far that a lot of people actually sort of thought that the painting was unfinished. This wonderful man here who deserves a real close look, because just one thing to note about the style, Manet's style, is this very abrupt transition from colors. So while in kind of more traditional style of painting, you would have a very sort of soft transition from one shade to another, or from the light catching a surface into another. We see here just this very blunt stroke of kind of gray paint on the black top hat to give the idea of the light catching it. And another great example is down here, this very blocky, the sort of blockiness of the transition of light on the inside of his leg there, of his trousers, and even more so here, almost just an outline to represent this idea of an umbrella. There's no kind of real sense of depth. But going back to this rather wonderful man who sits against this sort of lack of focus, again going back to this idea of photography, feels for me very focused subject there in this small section of the painting, with this very sort of blurred, out of focus backdrop. And this is in fact Eugène Manet. This is Manet's brother, who goes on in 1874 to in fact marry Berthe Morisot, who was sort of the leading female impressionist painter. And Berthe Morisot became very important to Manet, because she sort of really introduced him to this group of kind of slightly younger impressionist painters, including Monet, who he becomes incredibly close. Well, he becomes very close with particularly in the early 1870s, so a little bit later than when he's painting this painting. But other wonderful details is these little children here playing with buckets, I don't know, in the kind of the dirt. And then you have these lovely toys in the bottom right-hand corner, probably from other children, a little ball and a hoop. And then one of my favorite details, which I've never noticed before, but the joys of high resolution photographs and being able to zoom, is this gorgeous, very French looking pooch who's just plonked on the chair there with some sort of bow in her or his hair, which seems to match these wonderful sort of headscarves of these two women here. Again, looking out and looking at the color, these bright darts of color, like we discussed in the last session, very much causing this kind of this thread through the painting. So you get these very sharp bolts of red linking us from either side of the canvas to the back, to the front, these very bright bolts of blue, and again, these very light passages and these very dark passages. So the whole painting, as I said, has a kind of rhythm and noise. I mentioned that he went to, he traveled to be inspired by old masters, or was inspired on these trips by old masters. But he also is in Paris, and in Paris was the Louvre, which was the legacy of the French royal collection. But this is that was a slight tangent, because we are in the gardens of the Louvre being one of the most fantastic art collections in the world. And so Manet was able to go in there and draw and paint after the great masters, which was very much seen as a part of your artistic training for a young artist in Paris. And we know that he was very inspired, as I say, by the Spanish painter Velázquez. Manet was very interested about the relationship between the viewer and the viewed. So I don't know about you, but for me in this painting, I very much feel like I'm there, I'm part of it, and they all know that I am, or a huge deal of them do, because not only are these people looking out so we can identify them, but they're very much looking towards us. Are we the musicians? Are we sort of an intruder on the scene? I don't know what we are, but we're very much there. And this was something that Velázquez very much did with his own paintings. And for want of a better example, Las Meninas, for example, in the Prado, Velázquez sort of great masterpiece, where we see the artist painting at an easel, and you, the viewer, are in fact the King and Queen of Spain. We have this real sense of kind of being a part of the painting. And Manet very much picks up on that here. I just wanted to zoom in for a final time, because Manet, just in terms of like a visual experience, I really think if you see a painting by Manet in a museum, just really kind of appreciate this very gestural, loose approach to painting. You can see how he's, of course, been hugely inspirational to sort of modern and contemporary artists in this very sort of modular, almost abstracted application of paint. And for me personally, you know, you look at a section of green like this, and you think of Cézanne, who was, of course, a kind of post-impressionist painter. He's coming much later, but Manet's already making forays into this very kind of innovative, sort of, as I say, impressionistic, blocky kind of application of paint and color in order to render form. Thank you very much all for joining. And yeah, I will send out details for our next session, which will be in a fortnight's time, and we'll be continuing the theme of the sort of modern paintings we have at the National Gallery, which I'm thoroughly enjoying. And I hope to see some of you then. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great, really good.